What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia!
And Victoria.
We are two lifelong friends who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we explore new perspectives and we use books as tools for personal and community growth.
Yeah, we normally talk about a book. But this week, we are very excited to share this little bonus conversation with you. We are talking to author Evan James Sheldon about his book of new fairy tales called Children and Their Cages. And we're going to be asking him about his book and his experience as a writer, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So everyone, welcome, Evan.
Welcome, Evan.
Thank you for having me. Applause was thunderous. It was really good.
Yeah. So, brief bio. Evan James Sheldon's work has appeared in journals like the American Literary Review, the Cincinnati Review, the Maine Review, and New World Writing, among other journals. He is the features editor for Friction and the editorial director for Brink Literacy Project. He lives with his wife and child, soon to be children, very exciting, in Colorado.
Very exciting.
This is more of a personal question. We can cut it out, but I'm curious, when does baby number 2 arrive?
Baby number 2 arrives like mid-November, November 17th. So 5 days before my birthday as well, which is very...
Birthday buddies.
Yeah.
Holiday baby on its way.
It's just, you're so tired. It's like, really... I'll resurface like in April. My brain will be starting to function again.
That's optimistic. I don't have children of my own, but that sounds optimistic.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I read an article actually that said that parent brain, like all the sleep deprivation that happens, can take up to a couple years before your full brain function returns.
Holy shit.
Wow.
So if you're ever wondering why I am the way I am, like this is why.
Wow.
We'll catch up in a couple of years and be like, Evan, just watching your growth over these years, you feel like a different person than when I met you. Okay, terrible segue, but speaking of children, you recently released a book, Child into the World, Children in Their Cages.
Mm-hmm.
This came out just last month, right? Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah. Very excited. Very excited.
Yeah.
It's odd to have it out in the world. It's very odd.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work by yourself, and then things you don't ever think people are going to read. Like, even though every story in the book has been published in a journal, there's a lot of them are smaller journals, or even like the bigger journals, you don't know how many people are like actually clicking through, like, oh, I loved your cage head story. You know what I mean? Like how many folks are interacting with it. Now it's all put together and you're like, oh, I feel very exposed.
So I want to back up a little bit and talk about what your experience has been reading. What was the first thing that you read that made you think, oh yeah, I want to tell stories too. Like I want to do this also.
So I grew up in a family that was very strict. I couldn't watch, like, for example, I couldn't watch The Simpsons, but they had no restrictions on reading. So I couldn't watch Simpsons, but I could read Stephen King.
We love a loophole.
And so that was what I did. I very heartily took advantage of that. So I read lots of horror type things, and like pop horror, I guess, is probably how it would be classified these days. But like Dean Koontz and Stephen King. Then I really got into Lord of the Rings and all the fantasy stuff. I've read the whole Wheel of Time series.
Wow.
I know, it's impressive. So
that is Do you have a little like trophy if you finish it?
I should make one.
You know when we would get those like reading awards in school where there was like accelerated reading or like the Pizza Hut reading challenge? I want that for adulthood. Be like, I read every word of Crime and Punishment when we had it assigned on a syllabus. And I was so proud of myself because so many people read the whole book. And I want my trophies saying I sat through all of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment.
Let's see what I can find for you. That would be nice. Yeah.
So your child loophole, you're reading Stephen King.
One of my good buddies, he he also loved to read. And so we started playing this game that's like, guys are dumb in their 20s. And so we were like making reading competitive somehow. We would play Bookmaster. So you could ask the other person any question from a book that you've both read, like about character, names, locations, anything. And if they can't answer it, then you retain the Bookmaster title, and you can tell people that you're the Bookmaster and so forth, which you know, like at a bar when you're 25, telling people you're the Bookmaster, you can be surprised that I am married and so forth. That is what we did. And anyway, so we were drinking one night, playing the Bookmaster and talking about books and so forth. And I was like, man, I should try to do this. I bet I could do it. He was like, yeah, hell yeah, do it. You could write a book. And so I did. I went, it's like 400, 500 pages long, fantasy epic. And it's terrible. It was so bad. So after that, I went and started taking classes. And a local writers group called the Lighthouse teach classes, and they do asynchronous classes. So I could, do them in the morning and then go work at night. And it was really awesome for me. So I took a bunch of classes there and slowly started writing and publishing. Around that same time is where I found Friction. And back in the day, it was called, instead of Brink, it was called Tethered by Letters. So they had a little online forum. You could like post questions and things. And so I was on there like, how do I make this not suck? And, so forth. So yeah. Then I started working for them after I got in and doing the whole editorial side of things. That helps quite a bit with writing as well.
Yeah, being on both sides of the table, how that works.
So these stories are kind of an accumulation of those first few years of publishing, even though I wrote that first book like around 14 years ago or something like that. So
I'm very impressed that you finished that book that you think is very bad, because I feel like all of the things that I've started writing that I'm like, oh, this is terrible, I don't finish them. Because I feel like, oh, no one's going to want to read this, or I'm a terrible whatever. And then it I get a quarter of the way through and then I get stuck and then I give up. But the fact that you wrote 400 pages, it doesn't matter if it's bad. Like, what a way to start.
I didn't know that it was bad until I got to the end and I was like, oh shit, I was writing about something that happened in my childhood. That was And so I just kind of pushed the book to the side and buried it on my computer and pray that nobody ever accesses it.
Carmen Maria Machado put together, it was a response to something that happened in the publishing news, whatever. We'll link it, people can read the whole thing. But one thing I liked was that she was writing about the pressure on debut authors, and mentioned that, I don't know if she was quoting someone, sorry, I didn't realize I was going to be referencing this in the podcast today, so I don't have any notes on it. But what I remember is everyone's got about 2 or 3 bad novels in them before they get to the good one. And if you can write those first 2 without the expectations of like, this has to be something, or like there's pressure on me I'm in my MFA program, I have to get this first book out to get that deal to start my career, all this stuff. If you could just get those out of your system and then maybe by the 3rd one or the 2nd one or whatever number it is for you that you reach the book that like, okay, this is the one that's going to be published, and then debut with that. I don't know, just kind of like lift some of the burden of the first thing being great. I wrote a lot of like beginnings of fantasy YA stories when I was a teenager. And I have found so many journals where I have mapped every character. I have mapped out the entire world they live in. I'm doing all this like world building off to the side, all these notes, and also like weird notes of me being like, will I retain rights to make this a movie someday? I'm like, what? Victoria, you haven't even written more than 2 chapters of it. Oh my
God.
And you're already thinking about like, when I'm a famous 15-year-old author, what I'm going to do with this.
Baby Victoria is one of my favorite people. Every new thing I learn about Baby Victoria endears me so much more. She was like a little tiny adult. She's like film rights.
Anyways, props to getting the first book out, even if it wasn't great, but getting it out from your head into the page and reaching an end of it.
I've got two done that are both not going to, I will not be trying to get them published, and I'm almost done with the 3rd. So maybe this 3rd one will be
it's a sign. It's the one. So your book is generally short fiction, but flash fiction, which we haven't really covered on the podcast. Partially because, at least in my mind, my only understanding of what it is that you write it fast.
Interesting. Okay.
Which I don't think is correct.
No, not.
So I did.
Yeah.
That's really funny. I did not know that's what you thought flash fiction was.
I think that's how it was presented to me, like in a high school creative writing class or something, and I just never. No one ever explained it in greater detail, and so I just had to nod along and pretend like I knew what this word was. So, for my edification as well as for the listeners, what is that genre and what do you like about it?
Flash fiction is it's just very, very short fiction. And there's all sorts of kind of submitting or publishing terms around it. So there's microfiction, there's flash fiction. And it just generally has to do with the length, like the word count, actually. So almost all flash fiction, and this varies, of course, journal to journal, but is around 1,000 words or less.
Oh, that is short.
So yeah, I kind of fell into writing flash. I was working at my first editorial job was at Flash Fiction magazine.
Oh.
But I had written a story and they published it, and then I went to edit for them. As a genre, it's really very vibrant for the kind of indie scene and the writing community. There's a lot of play that happens, a lot of experimentation, and that happens for a couple reasons. One, it's just the length allows for it. 1,000 words, you can do a lot of things that are strange and unique. So you could maybe write a recipe, or you write do a calendar so it's only actually like 20 words, but you're showcasing some emotional movement. And the other reason why I think so many people gravitate towards it is it takes on the editorial side, it takes so much less time to read and work with. It's put together, it's compact. And so flash journals abound. There's tons of them for a starting writer who's trying to build your kind of credibility, and you want more publishing credits. Writing a 7,000 word story and getting it published is much more difficult than writing a 500 word story and getting it published. It's hard to write flash fiction that's good, but initially it's very appealing. I'll write 3 stories a week this way, instead of working on one story for a month. But yeah, that's the genre, and I kind of kept writing it for a variety of reasons. One, I've got a little daughter now. I just didn't have a lot of time, not connected time, if that makes sense. Like I can write for 5 minutes, and then I've got to go do something, and then I've got to come back to it. And I also just began to really appreciate the form after writing it for quite some time and reading it and editing it and so forth. There's novels in flash, novellas in flash. It's a whole subgenre. I think the most popular is The House on Mango Street.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know that's what that was.
Yeah, and it's not classified as that. Flash fiction is not something that people really use as a marketing term. So those types of things aren't mentioned. But if you go through and read it, each chapter is well under 1,000 words. That's much more popular in other parts of the world besides the US.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know in creative writing classes, I feel like I always ended up liking it more when there actually were more limitations on what I could write. And as I got into more advanced workshops and stuff where there's 7 people and you're write whatever you want, limit 25 pages. And I could write anything. That's really, in some ways I was happier when they narrowed it down a lot. Yeah. Either by word count or content or style, or if you were trying to mimic someone else, write a story like Alice Munro. You won't do it nearly as well, but try. And it's some kind of structure. Do you find that as well, writing flash fiction?
Oh yeah, the thing most ton of writers talk about is fear of the blank page, right? Because it can be daunting to sit there and look at it and go, okay, how do I start? What do I do? Because once you get rolling, it's probably fine. Your kind of education, writer instincts, whatever you want to call it, kind of kicks in, and you're able to write through the end and then try to fix it. So any of those kind of restrictions not only are helpful for pushing you forward but getting you started for sure.
Yeah, sitting down to say, I'm going to, maybe I'm only going to write 500 words today, and that's going to be a piece, or 1,000 words today, and that's going to be a piece to then work on. And I think you can kind of come back to that feedback loop quicker, which, as I talked about in my 15-year-old writing approach, never happened because I never actually finished anything to read it again and get any feedback on it. So, okay, this is a collection of short fiction, flash fiction, but it's also a collection of fairy tales. Mm-hmm. So what drew you to writing what you call new fairy tales?
It's actually really interesting that we were talking about those kind of restrictions and form. Fairy tales were what helped me to kind of approach the blank page because they have a set structure and form that you can kind of access. So there's an opening movement. There's a way that you are introduced into the world, and then you move on quickly. And there's less things that you have to be concerned about with writing fairy tales. You're not interested in explaining the world, right? No one's like, why is this wolf talking? You just move on. It's just like, this wolf is talking. You accept that there's a certain magic that's functioning in the reality. It allows you to not worry about engaging the reader with like answering the questions that may arise. You're only concerned about forward movement. There's a really excellent essay by Kate Bernheimer. It's in Tin House's Writer's Notebook, which if you haven't read and are thinking about writing, top tier. It's so excellent. She walks through the form of fairy tale and the function of those forms and how they work together. And there's all sorts of different elements. Flatness of characters, tend to use very blocky colors. Like they're not going to be like, teal or magenta or whatever. It's like the lake was blue. It was super blue.
Google colors.
Yeah. And, there's lots of use of glass and, there's whole other things happening there. But for me, there's like a tiny little story in that essay that she calls the perfect fairy tale. And the form of it is just very accessible. And so I was like, oh, I can do this. It let me access it in a way that I hadn't put together prior. And so that's why I started writing. So all of the stories in this collection, some of them are literary fiction. They don't have anything fantastical about them. One of the first stories is about a father and son dove hunting. But the reason why it's called New Fairy Tales throughout is because it uses the structure of fairy tales, even for those stories that don't have the more traditional fantastical elements.
Yeah, like the very first story, like A Hunger, is where you have you mentioned like a kid with a cage for a head. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was such a great way to open the collection to be like, I'm telling fairy tales. And you're not going to answer questions like, well, how does this child eat if their head is a cage? It's like, I don't have to think about the biology of how this works. Right. But I can just like sit with the weirdness of it and have that image. And I think that's one of the strongest things. I feel like there's so many stories and there's like, they all have like these really strong images that I come back to in the same way of Little Red Riding Hood with her red hood and like Hansel and Gretel leaving their breadcrumbs. Like we've been told those stories time and again, but they also have very like tangible images that we can hold on to. So when someone tells you the story, you can picture it very quickly as a child would, and you're not taking the poetic time to talk about the burgundy hues of the leaves or something like that, which I'm sure is great in other contexts, but that's not what you're doing here.
Yeah. What you mentioned about images is one of my most favorite things about writing and fairy tales in general. I've actually written and published a little bit of poetry because I've been drawn to like the lyrical nature of it all. But it's the images that really stand out. And that's what shifted me from writing poetry to more fiction, and learning how to play with them in fairy tales is what kind of made that leap possible for me. But the fun thing when reading fairy tales with big images for the reader and for the writer is like, maybe I have some intention behind why I'm writing this or whatever. But really, once I'm done with the piece, it's out of my hands entirely. And all of those connections are made mentally by the reader. So, like what that cage represents for the reader, for that boy, he meets another boy who's got a bee head, hive head, and he helps him do the same. Like what those things are representing for the individual reader were probably very different than what my intention was behind it when I was writing it. And that kind of openness, and fairy tales are not very didactic, which is very nice. And, allows for a lot of interpretation, which some people hate. They want to be able to walk away with like a clear, like, oh, this is what the writer was telling me, but I'm not super interested in that.
Yeah. But there are also a lot of writers who don't like that either. Like, I feel like that's a very generous way to write, to have sort of open-handed of like, you can interpret this however you want. There are a lot of writers who would not let go of that kind of control of like how their work is perceived.
Yeah, I think learning to let go of that is probably a pretty big step for a writer's maturity, because literally you can't. Like there's no way to maintain some sort of control over how the reader will perceive your work.
I'm curious, when you're writing and going back and editing your pieces, do you find yourself having to trim back a lot of the details, or is it working harder to flesh out, to find that sweet spot of openness with the reader, so that there's enough to grab onto, but not so much that you're telling the reader what they should be getting out of it?
Yeah, I write the bones essentially, and then go through and over gild everything. So it's like a three drafts, right? So I write the bones, and then and during that draft, I figure out what it is I'm writing, and then I go back and add in all the fun details for me, which can change the story or what have you, and overwrite almost every time on that draft. And then the third draft and third editorial pass, whatever, is going back and cutting so that it's not preachy, hopefully. Not
Yeah.
One of the most common editorial notes that we give to early writers is take the last sentence, cut it, and make it the title. And that was very true for me. Still is. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I just went one sentence too far. Let's just pare it back just enough. It takes a long time. I wish there was a better way. You kind of fall into the things that work for you. With the novel I'm working on currently, I write it all by hand, and then I type it from memory later on. Kind of the good stuff sticks in and the rest falls out.
This is a lot of you've got a lot of gems, a lot of good advice. Everything you're saying, I'm like, this is all very good advice. Anyone who's trying to write.
I've been trying and failing at it for years. So
yeah. You've earned some wisdom.
So I kind of want to backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit more about fairy tales. What do you see as the role of fairy tales, like, in our society? Like, where's the need for new fairy tales?
Yeah, well, I think that kind of goes back to the function of fairy tales in general, and writing in general, are kind of rooted in history, and same with horror, actually, which is really interesting. They tend to get at what we're afraid of at the time, we're worried about. And fairy tales have been around for so long, even before horror was a thing. Or fairy tales are terrible; they're brutal little stories. So maybe they're the first kind of horror stories there are. I don't know, but if you study the history of fairy tales, it really is like the history of society, history of fear. And I think that is very much continued by new writing. You want to, as you explore and use fairy tales, it's not just about the weirdness or the flatness of the characters or the glass and the mirrors and whatever. It's about what we're worried about in society, or maybe individually. So I think there probably will always be room for new fairy tales. I hope so. I hope there's other people writing them all the time. To jump back to the horror thing, there's a really rad book about what Americans perceive as haunted, and it connects it to history. I think fairy tales kind of do something similar. In that book, it traces like, there was a whole genre built around houses that are built on Indian burial grounds, because there's rightfully some guilt behind taking that land. There's a fear there, and so it traces not only history, but also like some of the more terrible things that have happened. And so I think that's part of what fairy tales function is.
What kind of fairy tales, if any, do you like read or tell your kid?
Any feelings on Disney as well? as a fairy tale connoisseur, I'll sort of tack that on.
I mean, the older kind of Disney movies are terrible for girls to watch. I've got a little girl. I don't want her. I mean, The Little Mermaid, like, give your voice away so you can be with a man who doesn't even know you exist. Like, that's the worst thing there is. It's a terrible takeaway. And all those, like, come be saved by some random dude. Like, that's I not a big fan. And I can't really read her a lot of fairy tales, because they're pretty brutal. The originals are, people are chopping off hands to avoid things, and all sorts of wild I think there's a fun list that's like easily searchable. That's like the most horrific fairy tales, 10 most horrific fairy tales. And there's some of the most popular ones.
Yeah.
So I tend to not read her. It's kind of unavoidable in our household, but eventually she will have access to all the fairy tales. But right now she doesn't,
A little young for chopping off your toes to
she just turned
fit him
3.
in a shoe.
Yeah. Not gonna happen.
When I was trying to think of like modern fairy tales, the one that immediately comes to mind is the girl with the green ribbon.
Yeah, Carmen Maria Machado. Yeah.
She didn't write the original one, did she? The one that we all had to read in like
Oh, I
grade
don't
school or
know.
whatever?
I don't know. Hers is my favorite, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean hers is amazing, but I just remember there was probably a BuzzFeed article about it where it was like, "Hey, do you guys all remember when we read this really messed up story where she takes the ribbon off and her head falls off? Do you guys remember that? We read that when we were like 7."
We're all scarred because of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found the BuzzFeed article. It's literally titled, "For everyone who's still fucked up over that story about the girl with the ribbon around her neck."
Yeah.
And you don't know. It's such a bizarre thing to read as a kid because you're so used to being given stories with morals, stories with an explanation, stories with a plot mountain, story, you know what I mean? Like it's so different from what we're always taught as this is what a story is, and it makes you feel like this at the end, and it all ties up in a bow, and instead you're just left with like, what?
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And yeah, so I feel like when I was reading your stories and trying to find comparisons for myself of like, what other stories make me feel like this? that was one that came to mind where it was like, that was one of the first times that I feel like I had that kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for some of the more like sanitized Disney fairy tales, it became almost like a point of pride at a certain age where it's like, but do you know the real story? Like, this is so gross, let me tell you. Versus, yeah, I'm curious, and I'm sure there has been research done on this, and I'd be curious to read about it as far as like what the role of those fairy tales were originally. And like, were they told to children? Like, we call them like children's fairy tales, but like, what age are we talking? Because 10, yeah, then it's fascinating, but when you're 3, like your child, it's like maybe let's do nightmares about evil witches and things like that.
There's a really excellent book, and I'm gonna space the name, but it traces some of that, because all like the majority of fairy tales were originally, it was all oral, it was oral tradition, and so it's actually, I think it's the history of the Grimm brothers versions. And so some of them, not a lot, but some of them were also like Hansel and Gretel is a story that was told to children to keep them from wandering into the woods or whatever. Like there's a specific function in that society about how you should act.
You mentioned that since, like, when we were talking previously, you mentioned that since you've prepped this collection for publication, your writing style has actually changed. And I was curious, like, if you want to share, like, in what ways has your writing changed and has you grown and evolved as a writer since some of these stories are written?
Yeah, so some of it is not so different in that I still write very short, kind of bonesy type things. But the fantastical elements tend to be more rooted in like character psyche, I guess. So one way of saying it would be like there's enough world building to place it in in a literary fiction kind of style. But I really enjoy writing the things where you don't quite know if it's happening in real life or if it's in the character's head. Most of the stuff I play with falls along that kind of line these days. And part of that is because I've done it twice now where for a whole year, I only read things that are written in translation. So things that are written outside of English language for me and outside of the US primarily. And that just is like, it's wild what the marketing kind of publishing structure does to fiction in the US. Because those same strictures are not necessarily in place in other parts of the world. So if you go read South American authors, for example, there's like a lot of strange things, strange time slippage where you'll just like mid-sentence, you'll have an ellipse and then it's like, and then I was at this other spot. Like, that's weird as shit. Like, that's so strange. I love it. generally speaking, I mean, reading outside of kind of mainstream US material really opens you up to a lot of stylistic choices and structural choices that aren't so readily accepted, primarily for marketing purposes. Like the folks who are working as editors in big publishing houses are wicked smart. They're so intelligent, but they have to sell things, and so some of that kind of all holds back us from having a multitude of Lydia Davises, or you know what I mean, more playful things. So those years reading in translation kind of have really shaped some of my goals and things that I'm thinking about now structurally. So like content wise, I tend to write somewhat similar to the things that are in this. There's certain themes that are inescapable for you as a writer. I'll always write about family and kids, and I also like have kind of a strong Southern Gothic bent in some of my writing, and that's also unavoidable for me. I grew up, my dad was a Southern Baptist pastor. That's where I get in, that's my territory. So Flannery O'Connor and Toni Morrison and Cormac McCarthy are my people. Anyway, so some of the stuff I'm interested in now tends to blend a variety of those things. So, like fairy tale structure, perhaps, or fairy tale form on the micro, and then some larger structural things that I'm attempting that I like from reading internationally, and then a little bit of Southern Gothic thrown in.
Yeah, there was a detail, I think it was in the dove hunting story that you mentioned, that the other father and son who join on the hunting trip, it's mentioned just like one of the dads from church or something like that. And I also grew up, my dad works in church ministry, and it was just like a small detail that maybe doesn't mean anything to anyone else, but I'm like, oh, I know that. I know the, like, we're going to go do this thing with this family you kind of know because you see them all the time, but it's not like your friend necessarily. That kind of dynamic. I talk about reading, letting the story be open to the reader's experience. I immediately was thinking of like those church families that I grew up with, because you see them all the time, and then you just go do random things with them. You're like, remember when we did that entire camping trip with those people we don't even talk to anymore? But we did.
That particular story is far more representative of what I do now.
Mm-hmm.
So still some surreal type elements, but much more we're going hunting type stories.
So for readers who enjoyed your book, what would you recommend they try next? Or vice versa, if they like XYZ, they'll probably like your book. They should check it out.
Yeah, I mean, we already talked about Carmen Maria Machado. You should definitely check her out. If you read my book and you dig it, she's like really excellent. And vice versa. You like that green ribbon story? There's weird stuff in my book too, I guess.
Yeah.
That aside, I would recommend a couple books. They're full novels, but they're just so good. A Luminous Republic by, I'm going to maybe butcher his name, Andres Barba. And then The Iliac Crest by Cristina Riviera Garza. Both are just phenomenal with strange moments. And then if you're interested in short form, but maybe not so much the speculative, strange, weird side of things, The Summer Book by Tove Janossin is maybe the most perfect book there is. It's small and very quiet. And part of the reason I connect with it is because it's just a grandmother and her granddaughter on this island, and just they're interacting and they're talking about occasionally big themes. So if there's some crossover there for the things I like to write, I guess. If you're interested more in the family side of things and the short form, I would totally read that.
Julie, did you want to throw in?
Yeah, mine was Carmen Maria Machado. That was like immediately I was like, oh, it gives you similar sort of like, oh, it's so creepy but so good.
That's like I got to workshop with her, and so she's like,
oh my god,
I adore her in ways that I can't even speak. So for you to say that just you really made my week. That was amazing.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I could feel the spiritual connection.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
What about you, B?
I recently read Sin Eaters by Caleb Tinkersley, and Yeah, it's got some weird stories. It's got some random, deep religious themes. Really questions a lot of stuff and very open to take it and run with it in a lot of stories. So I felt, yeah, similar vibes there. Especially the titular story in that collection, specifically Sin Eaters, has a woman who wakes up and her jaw is dropped. And it just keeps growing through the entire story. And it's creepy and weird and super cool.
Yeah, it sounds rad.
And then kind of harkening back to our mentions of like Toni Morrison, I was thinking of Friday Black by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brené.
He's got a novel coming out.
Oh, nice. I can't wait to read that.
Ugh.
Because the stories were, I mean, talk about images that stick with you. Like,
Yeah.
That book is so good. Oh, man.
it comes up every time we talk,
Yeah.
like, incredible good short fiction, when we talk horror.
I've been trying to get him for our journal for a long time.
Well, if anyone out there in the listener universe has a connection to Adjei-Brené, send it our way.
Yeah.
Wow. Yes, please.
It's good stuff. So the end of our episode, we always close out with some of the things we're currently obsessed with, things that are bringing us joy, things you've been watching, reading, listening to, eating, enjoying.
Can I do 2?
Yeah, as many. Julia usually has like 4, so like some context.
In my reading and translation time, I found a press called Charco Press. I just ordered every single book from their catalog that I could get my hands on from the library. I want to buy books. I do, but nonprofit work is not good for money. So
we love the library.
Yep, you support it how you can, right? But Ariana Harwick's Die My Love was published there, and which was longlisted for the Booker some time ago. But every book they put out is fantastic and stunning, lyrical, strange. I think that they only publish authors from Latin America, which is so sad because I want to send them my novel that I'm working on and I can't.
Long game. Move to Argentina.
Yes. So I can be published by this tiny press in the UK. But I'm obsessed with that. And then I also am obsessed with baking, which this happened to a lot of folks. I'm going to be super hipster about it and said I was doing it before it happened during the pandemic.
Claim it.
As far as a hobby that pairs well with writing, baking is top tier. Because you do a little bit and then you have to wander off while things do their scientific bubblings for a couple hours, and then you come back and do other things. And so I do really killer cupcakes for my child. Those are 2 things.
Love it. Julia, what are you currently obsessed with these days?
I just finished, this is a book that I think I had on my currently obsessed like 6 months ago, and then I put it down and read something else. So I finally finished Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber, and I'm obsessed. It's getting me fired up.
Yeah, I saw your post on Instagram, which was, if you have a job, you should read this book. And I'm like, okay, so like most... A lot of people. A large audience for that book.
A lot of people should read this book. Yeah. Anyone who will listen to me, I've been talking about it all week. So yeah. I don't know if joy is the right word that it's bringing me, but it's very good.
I'm currently reading Brecht Evans' The Making Of, which is a graphic novel that I bought when I was visiting Julia in Belgium. And we went to a comic book store, and they had a lot of things in English, but none of it was really in translation. It was all US and UK like comic book publishers. And I really wanted to get something that was Belgian. And so I asked the person working there, I'm like, do you have any of the Belgian comics, because there were so many and they were all in like Dutch and French and they looked cool, but I'm like, do you have any that have been translated? And this is the only one she had, but it's absolutely gorgeous. It's all watercolor, and I haven't gotten deep in it, but my partner's read it and he said it's like one of his like all-time favorite books now. He's like, it's a story that doesn't feel like it has a lot to it, and then it gets very deep, all about like creativity and creating things. It follows an artist. So I'm currently obsessed with it. I'm not even done with it, and I'm like, everyone go read it just because it's beautiful.
Can I go back and give another book rec?
Yeah.
If you like some of the stuff that's in there, you should read Leonora Carrington. She was one of the first surrealist painters and writers. She's got a collection. The complete works of Leonora Carrington is like, it's so good. And it's got tons of weird stuff in it, like a dinner with a hyena, and like, here, wear my face while we have a dinner together. Like, just strange stuff. If you like the crossover of art as well, she's also a painter. So can't believe I forgot.
Well, we got it in, so it's great.
Just in the nick of time.
Yeah.
You can send us voice memos for the next couple of weeks if you think about it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us, Evan.
Yeah.
It's really fun, and I'm glad this worked out. For listeners, we are on hiatus from our normal, in-depth book conversations, but we will be back in October with our full-length episodes again. And as always, you can find us over on Instagram with book memes and occasional posts about our travels. I say occasional because they are quite infrequent, but that's where we exist online.
Where do you exist online?
Yeah, where do you exist, Evan? Do you have an online anywhere you would like people to find you or leave you alone?
No, you're welcome to find me. I'm on Twitter. I primarily use that for book recs and submission calls. So I guess if you're a writer and looking for those things, you can follow me because I do those. You can just search my full name, Evan James Sheldon. I have a website, but it doesn't do much. But there's some poetry. You can check out some of my fiction on that site as well. There's a link to my book, which is cool. And my regular email is on my website too. So if you feel like hollering at me to talk about books or your own writing, I love doing that.
We will put links to all that in our show notes, as well as a link to your book.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Book Club with Julia and Victoria. We would love to hear your thoughts on this book or the topic we discussed, so you can share your review and recommendations with us on Instagram at BookClubWithJB, on our website, bookclubwithjb.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also visit our website for show notes with links to all of the recommendations and the things bringing us joy. If you don't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever podcast platform you are listening on so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Rebecca Gasme provides us with project management support. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick, and our logo was designed by Gabby Fabland. Until next time, happy reading.